Hello Struckpup. Today I'm bringing you a build for the Slayer for Bragi Axe Biter, and this build I've decided to call the Undefeated Duelist's Anvil because the Undefeated set, the Duelist chain reaction skill we're using, and the Strike of the Anvil, which is our main damage skill. So the build is very nice. It relies on rage, it relies on stunning the enemies, making stunned enemies bleed, making bleeding enemies take more damage, and making us deal more damage based on the number of bleeding enemies around us. It's stacking the critical damage bonus from two separate axes, which you can check later, the Heartseeker and the Last Fight, I believe were the names. And it also stacks a lot of crit damage from the Duelist chain reaction, which is 200 from there, 400 from the blessings of items, and you can see there's a nice crits 50, 60, 70 mil, 100 mil. I've gotten on Chaos 7 all the way to 130 something million damage, which is a very good amount of damage. It can easily do Chaos 7 with green gear. With the way I've set things up. Even though I don't have the most perfect gear, which you will see later, I will mention what the best options would be in which gear slot. The build heavily relies on stacking up cooldown reduction, crit hit chance, and paying close attention to the skill rotations. So if this sounds like the build you were looking for, then this is the video for you. So this is the gear setup for the build. You must be using the Undefeated set, or also called Challenge in the names of the items. And red set is okay, you would start with the red set, eventually you would upgrade and start using green items. So try to get cooldown reduction on the helmet. Then another place where you must have cooldown reduction and crit chance is the amulets. You need crit chance cooldown reduction here. You need crit chance cooldown reduction on the two rings, regardless of what rings you're using. This is a must have for this build. And a must have would be cooldown reduction and crit chance on the weapons. As you can see, I don't have the best possible stats. My Heartseeker is not using crit chance, so my crit chance is suffering in turn. That would be suffering because it relies on me performing critical hit. There's something that I must mention. You must be using Last Fight and Heartseeker. Even if they're not the best road, maybe you can replace something like one of them with a Bloodthirsty one or whatever you get with good roll. But I would strongly suggest using those two weapons. Even if they're not with the best rolls, as long as they give you some cooldown reduction and crit chance. Another thing to mention is don't be baited by some crit damage. If there's cooldown reduction, crit chance and damage, that's enough. Even if there's no HP, even if there's no crit damage, that's fine. You can still get something with crit chance and crit damage and armor piercing, but if there's no cooldown reduction, it's not worth it. And if there's no crit chance, it's also not worth it. Preferably, if you have to pick between one that gives you all the mentioned things and flat damage compared to one that gives you all the mentioned things and crit damage, go for the flat damage. For the critical percent, crit damage percent, you can get from blessing items with a mage. A level 50 mage can bless all your gear for 40% crit damage for a total of 400. So it's worth leveling a level 50 mage. It takes 4, 5, 6 hours. Maybe you can even do it in 3.5 hours if you speed rush, or maybe if someone power levels you. So keep that in mind. And 40 critical hit damage is kind of around let's say 2.5 crit chance, and let's say around 200 something damage. So if you put everything in damage, you would get around 200 flat damage. So sacrificing 40, 50, 60, even 70 and 80 crit damage is worth it if you know you can get 100, not 100 but 1000 or 2000 more flat damage. So keep that in mind. Another thing to pay attention to is the gloves. They can give you crit damage, damage and health. If you find something like this with crit damage, damage and health, I think this one is it, then you've hit gold. But if you can find one with flat damage and health, use it. Even if you lose 42% crit damage, even if you lose 30% crit damage, gaining that flat damage and that HP is nice. Even if you lose the HP, try to grab the flat damage at least. If you think you can survive without the HP. So, what else can we mention? Boots can give you speed bonus, of course it's not a priority, try to get as much HP as you can on all pieces, but when you kinda have to choose to sacrifice HP, I'd choose to sacrifice it on the bracers. Or something like sacrificing HP for cooldown reduction on the helmet might be worth it. On the armor there doesn't seem to be something worth taking, like you don't need cost reduction, so go for something with good HP and armor. And for the rings, I personally prefer to go with Insulation Ring and Old Ring of Resonance. But something that's worth mentioning is a Siege Breaker would give you a lot of damage if you find one with crit chance and cooldown reduction. It's worth testing it out. If you think you don't need that extra health restored from this one, then go ahead and play with something like that. Another thing that's worth mentioning is Fiery Ring of Tori. So if you get a Fiery Ring of Tori, that means you can get a good cooldown reduction. You can either stack it with a Mountain Pendant or get rid of the Mountain Pendant and just rely on Fiery Ring of Tori. If you do that, you need a lot of crit chance, over 45%, for that to proc. Otherwise, it's better to use the Mountain Pendant or just to stack both of them together. Something else mentioning is Old Ring of Dexterity would not be really good for this build because the skills that generate energy are this one for this build. And something like Old Ring of Shadow may be good if you find a good road one, but maybe it's not as good because I didn't find this dodging to work as often as I would want it to. So you do have some options such as Gromry Ring for extra damage reduction, but it's not worth it. But if you find a good crit chance and cooldown reduction, use whatever ring you can, even if you sacrifice this insulation bonus. If you sacrifice the Mountain Pendant for a Fiery Ring of Tori, there are some great options such as the Pendant of Slaughter, but kind of not good for you. You're only using this as a god skill, so avoid this. Another thing to avoid for now would be the one that heals you when using god skills. It's called Bloodstone Pendant, and why? Because those god skills currently would heal the enemies as well. It's probably a bug, it seems like it's a bug and it shouldn't heal the enemies. And imagine healing a boss for 20% of his HP each time you use this, when you're kind of spamming it with this kind of build. So avoid this until they fix it, otherwise then this will be the perfect pendant together with the Fiery Ring of Tori. This is what I'll be using if they fix this. Another thing worth mentioning, Pendant of the Rebel. It's good, especially if you're using something in the skills such as like if you're using something like Elixir of Power or Elixir of Swiftness, then what you want is to be using this pendant. You want to be using the potion 40% more often, even though it heals less, so that you can benefit from those bonuses. So keep that synergy in mind. If you're using Fiery Ring of Tori, use this. If you unlock those skills I've mentioned, you can probably put one of those skills, sacrifice something to get that extra damage spammed. Another one would be, what was it? There was this one. No, actually that was it. That's all of them. There is no longer a one that gives you extra damage, just one that boosts the god skills. So I think I've mentioned enough, and I just quickly want to show you where to get those invasion related things. The Ring of Resonance you can get here, Ring of Shadow and Ring of Dexterity here. You might reach a wall here or here that you won't be able to complete unless you grab those corruption resistance nodes. So start with this, move on to this, move on to this, move on to this, then go down. And of course you might have to grab this one for the build Duelist Chain Reaction because it's needed. And this is where you get the potions. You don't need the one with resistance I think, but the Elixir of Power and Elixir of Swiftness are pretty much very nice the way I combine them with this Pendant of the Rebel. So this is it for the gear. Next you would see the skill points and the god skills. So these are the skills I'm using. Fury is not needed, you can take anything or just remove it. It doesn't cost any points, so you can, if you want, take axe throw, whichever you prefer. Avenging Charge is not needed, but I keep it because it leaves a trail of fire which can burn the enemies, and this trail of fire can actually proc things like Ring of Insulation or any other ring that depends on crit, such as maybe a Siege Breaker ring or another ring such as the, what was it called, Fiery Ring of Tori. So keep that in mind. Having this would help the enemies that get burnt, and each tick can perform a critical hit. So maybe it's worth taking, but if you want you can remove it and just put whatever else, or just get some other points to upgrade maybe something else like Spite Smite or something else on that SWAT. Code to Oath is a great skill. It instantly stuns the enemies, which in turns puts bleeding on the enemies, and then they benefit from deep gushes and trail of blood to take more damage and for us to deal more damage based on the number of bleeding enemies around us. So keep that as superior, because it also does secondary damage to stunned enemies, and we are stunning the enemies, we're resetting our cooldown, so you might do Call to Oath, then end up resetting your cooldown and doing another Call to Oath. Especially if you're stacking both Fiery Ring of Tori and Mountain Pendant, then that would be an amazing thing to try if you have good rolls on those. Strike of the Anvil is an amazing skill that gives us a lot of damage, and the master version cooldown is around 3 seconds. For me it's 4 seconds, now I think I have some rage, and maybe that's why it isn't exactly the way it is. But if you can get it to 3 seconds with cooldown reduction from the gear, that's gonna be nice. Ancestor's Gift is a great skill, and even the most basic version of it is pretty nice to have. Now let's see how much the cooldown went down. I think it probably doesn't right now. So this is a Wasp Bastion Heroic, something that you get from the set. It heals you, it grants you rage, and it gives you health bonus based on the number of bleeding enemies. Pretty nice skill, and it gives you such a nice amount of HP with this current setup. Now Spite Smite Superior you could remove. I decided to go for Superior because I needed more skill points for more passives and more other things to put. But you can even remove it and maybe put something else like this skill that gives you extra bonus damage when you have max energy. This is 30% all of the time, especially if you're not using Avenging Charge. Wasp Bastion would give you enough energy to at one point just have maximum energy and not care about it. So keep it in mind, this is kind of almost permanent 30% damage instead of the 20 or 30 from Spite Smite Superior or Mastered. I might try and experiment later today when streaming with this. Trail of Blood Mastered, great skill, must have for the build. Deadbolt Mastered, must have for the build. Deep Gashes, I believe it's a must have for the build. This is something that I think is a must have. You won't have it right now, but you would need to do invasion for it, and this is where you unlock it, from this invasion node. But before you can be able to do this, it's a Chaos 5 invasion with a lot of corruption. You would need to do something like this, and this. Those give you a total of 60 corruption resistance. And a bonus thing while you're doing those, you might want to grab the other nodes that reduce the enemy armor, reduce the enemy damage, reduce the enemy's HP, and give you some extra resistance to different other things. So grab those, grab those, grab those, grab those, grab those two as well, and then move on to trying to grab Duelist Chain. You can try and go all the way here for those, but that's kind of not needed. I think you would be fine, even with red gear maybe you should be fine, but if you whack the gear and maybe need a few green pieces, just farm some relic hunts on Chaos 2, 3 or even 4 if you can handle it, then gear up and try again if you kind of reach a dead end at some point. This is something I think is great because it stacks up to 4 times and that's an extra 200 damage, 200 crit damage for the build. It stacks up well with Heartseeker, it stacks up well with Wasp Fight, and it stacks up well with other things that might give you extra crit damage, such as Rage and etc. So Eternal Grid Superior, I think this is perfect because we're a rage based build, so the rage would be more effective and it will last longer. So I believe it's worth sacrificing Spite's Might Mastered for some extra skill points so you can put this. So this seems to be it about the skill points. Now let's talk about the god skills. The god skills look like this. Most people who use a similar build would probably go all the way down here, all the way to that cooldown reduction. This is a total of 8 cooldown reductions split into 4 nodes of 2. If you are using Mountain Pendant and the Fiery Ring of Tori, this is much not needed. If you're using maybe just the Mountain Pendant like me, maybe you can still kind of be okay. If you're using Fiery Ring of Tori, then you really need a good crit chance. So you can't afford sacrificing crit chance from your weapons and from your amulet and from your rings if you want to proc the cooldown reduction from Fiery Ring of Tori and to not spend and waste points here. Wasting points here would kind of get rid of a lot of crit damage. You can see there's one node here, then another here, and another crit damage node was here. So this is 4 all the way just for those. And if you keep going back, you can see there's one more here. So that's like 5 nodes of crit damage just from those nodes here. And there's I think one around here somewhere. There we go, one here. Something you could do if you don't need extra HP, you can get rid of those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 nodes and that champion damage reduction. And then with those 7 nodes you can go all the way to here, which is 6, and then you can grab this with extra 10% damage, or you can grab this for extra 25% damage, but then you're losing another 5% HP or another 15% HP, 10% HP for a total of 15. And think about those nodes here. Just from those 4 and this one you get 18% HP. So maybe it's not worth it, because after all you are a close range combateer and you're relying heavily on fighting a lot. Yes, you are proccing Ancestor's Gift often, so you have invulnerability, you have healing. If you think you can survive, remove this, remove those are actually optional, you can put the points wherever you want for those two. And then maybe try and do what I suggested. Maybe try and get those nodes, maybe try and go all the way here for that extra cooldown reduction. But this is a must-have. Those 5% cooldown reduction are very nice in the build. This kind of sums it up. Of course, you don't need Spite Might Mastered the way I've set things up, but I actually needed those crit damage, so I went further. You also get, as you can see, with this setup, 175 crit damage, 26 damage, and 18% armor piercing, on top of the 24% max health. So this is it for the god skills, and next I'll just show you how this build kills a Chaos 7 boss. Okay folks, this is a bit of gameplay footage before I show you the boss fight. You can see I kind of obliterated one of the elites, but then I didn't see the healer. I kind of am not the best at aiming my Anvil strike to land where I need it to, and I'm not the best at spotting the healers on time. Thus I ended up wasting a bit of time doing damage and then they get healed. Of course, pay attention to your rotations, and as for the boss, start by rushing in. Then we kind of either start with Anvil strike and then use our invulnerability, then heroic oath, then spam another Anvil strike, then maybe another heroic oath, then you can heal with Wasp Bastion. Keep in mind, you can either use invulnerability then heroic oath, or you can use Heroic Oath and then use Wasp Bastion to heal based on the number of bleeding enemies, which there will be after using Heroic Oath. And whenever needed, just run out. You can either use Avenging Charge or maybe something else. You can even try replacing Avenging Charge with Mountain's Wrath and using that for extra stunning. Make the build your own. Let me know if you have your own variations of the build. I'd like to hear from you guys in the comment section. So whenever you have any ideas of how to improve the build, show me your ideas, tell me how you think it's best. I would appreciate it. Thank you folks for watching this video. If you liked it, you can let me know by hitting that button. And if you want to see more build videos and be notified when I premiere them and upload them, you can subscribe to my channel. You can also find links to my Twitter, Facebook, Twitch and Mixer pages in the description below and the upcoming end of video sequence. Keep it cool guys, and until next time, goodbye.